All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to CTE's, yay. Welcome to the CTE's presentation about pronouns and what matters. My name is Professor Twan Dean. I should just say Twan Dean. I am the CTE coordinator, one of two. Magna is the other. And it is my honor to introduce today's speaker that's going to be talking to you all in regards to pronouns here at Triton College. The speaker in this case, Rebecca Alejos, in this case, was selected because of her outstanding work, what she is doing not only at her institution, but also around the United States. She has visited other institutions, presented this presentation. In fact, she has also been nominated to present this presentation at NASA, which is very exciting for her. With that, she has been with the I forgot the name of the college, girl. Uh, oh my
Northeast
goodness.
Lakeview College in San Antonio, Texas.
Thank you so much. I forgot. All the colleges in this case, when I met her, she was ecstatic and we it was just full of joy and we connected. And I'm honored that she has been selected by our CT community to come in and present this presentation to all of you. Any and all of the work that we're going to have and any material that's going to be presented by Rebecca will be saved. This recording is also going to be saved for those individuals who would like to go back and look at it. And any materials that's going to be shared through the presentation, we will have it in the CTE and we will also be emailing it out to you. Without further ado, I don't want to take up a lot of time because we have a lot of material that she's going to present to all of you. But again, it is my honor to present this to today's speaker that's going to be talking about pronouns and how they matter because, again, it is one of the topics and one of the things here at Triton College that we're implementing and doing. And we also want to recognize our students and use those to also keep them in a sense of belonging, but and also respect them as well, too. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our speaker. I so apologize that I'm talking too long, but I'm going to turn it over to our speaker who's going to do our presentation. Rebecca, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. So I just want to make sure really quickly that you all can see my screen. Are we good?
We're good. We're good.
Perfect. So thank you for that intro. My name is Rebecca Alejos. Most folks just call me by my last name, Alejos. When you play sports your whole life, no one remembers your first name, so I'm used to that. I use they, them series pronouns, and in Spanish, it's ella, which is the equivalent for folks who are, queer, gender, non-conforming, non-binary, etc. As Twan mentioned, pronouns are important right now. In fact, our LGBTQIA+ students are under attack across the nation. And it's important for us to understand the use of pronouns because institutions of higher education are facets of American life that inform perceptions and stereotypes about gender performance and expression. Identity formation is a vital part of the development process in college. And it is often the space and place where students begin the coming out process, or it is the place where they continue the coming out process. And college campuses provide students with unique opportunities to explore all of the complexities of social environments that are specifically related to race, gender, and sexuality. We know and we understand that the institutionalized heteronormative constructions and dichotomies in the classroom can lead to marginalization and misrepresentation of students in the LGBTQIA+ community. I feel very strongly that it is the role of higher education to prod these points of exclusion and expose the ways in which LGBTQIA folks own their prosperity and survival on college campuses, again, where those societal norms and values pertaining to gender often place sanctions on those engaging in what society has deemed gender inappropriate behavior. So today, what I hope that you gain from this is knowledge on pronouns as a part of inclusive and respectful vocabulary. It's all about inclusive language, and it's us just taking the time to make those adjustments to ensure that all folks feel included, valued, and seen. In addition, I want to provide you with some strategies so you can engage positively with pronouns, especially as it relates to our academic context. Understanding the role of pronouns is important. Again, it's just acknowledging the differences between identity, orientation, and expression, and the role that pronouns play in that. So why focus on pronouns? Again, our community is under attack. And what we want to do is ensure that folks who are asking you to use a specific pronoun or name are honored. So for our trans youth and non-binary youth, you'll hear me say youth throughout the presentation. I'll use it as the age group between 13 and 24, which is what most of the data reports as youth, which again are the folks that we're serving, especially if you have dual credit students, traditional students, etc. So again, we want to make sure that these students are feeling affirmed and safe and accepted in the spaces that we are providing to them, because again, they're often targeted by discriminatory, anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ laws and policies. So right now, I like to remind people that the future is queer. And so we have to be able to challenge our viewpoints, right? And what happens is we're so used to these gendered norms. We've grown up learning to take gender and base it on like these internalized visual and cultural norms. But it takes a great deal of intentional practice to stop relying on those norms in the ways that we gender people that we encounter. We understand that you're going to make mistakes. It's only natural, but of course you'll make fewer mistakes with practice. When we do make those mistakes, there is an awful lot of harm in misgendering students and other people. While mistakes are a normal part of the process, those mistakes can still cause harm. So I would like you to start to spend some time thinking through how to respond when you make those mistakes that will best limit the harm that is happening when we misgender students. And then another challenge that we face is our worldview and our self-view, right? It's often common for us to get defensive when we're asked to change the way that we speak, act, or think, especially when it's something as foundational to our worldview and self-view as gender often is. So give yourself some space to process those feelings without letting your initial reaction impact the way that you treat our trans students or anyone under the LGBTQ umbrella. So what are pronouns, right? What are they and how do we use them? People are always saying, you know, I'm not really sure how to use them. I keep hearing people introduce themselves with pronouns, but it's a really good way to help you get to know someone. But also it gives you an opportunity to know how people would like to be referenced or how people would like to be addressed in any given situation. Oftentimes people don't give pronouns the same respect as names, but they're just as important as someone's name. It is a mandatory thing and it's not a preference. So we'll often hear people say preferred, but it's not a preference. That would insinuate that using the correct pronoun is an option, but it's not. There's no flexibility in someone's identity. And when we are using the term preferred, we're really saying that someone's identity isn't as valid. So respect it. Ensure that you're listening to folks when they introduce themselves. And if you're not really sure what their pronoun is, just ask. It's important just to create that space where you're able to ask, because honoring pronouns contributes to a positive sense of belonging. And that is absolutely tied to academic success. So when we use pronouns correctly, when we use folks' preferred name, that will help lower levels of depression, suicidal ideation, and suicidal behavior among LGBTQIA students. So putting pronouns into practice shows that you're committed to building an affirming space for all types of identities and experiences. So it's important for us to be intentional and meaningful as we are using and learning to use pronouns. So again, the importance is, bottom line, the future is queer. We are seeing more students identify under the LGBTQIA plus umbrella than ever before. So the Association of American Universities released their data from 2015, and they reported that 17% of our undergraduate and graduate students are identifying. This means that some of those students are going to be identifying as transgender or non-binary. or questioning, which means 1.7% of our students could absolutely be feeling marginalized in our classroom when we are not honoring their pronouns and name. So we
Rebecca,
have five. Oh, go ahead.
if I may, you have a question from the audience. Leslie?
Absolutely.
Hi, Alejos. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So my name is Leslie, she, her. I just wanted to pause for a moment because you made a really good point that pronouns are not preference, pronouns are identity, but there can be preferred name. Could you just touch on
Yes.
that a moment more? Because I think there's some, I think we could use a little bit more of that at this institution, if you wouldn't mind.
Absolutely. Thank you. And again, I appreciate the pause. If you need to ask a question or interject, please do so. I appreciate that. So pronouns are not a preference because our identity is not something we choose. It's something that we are trying to align or find congruence with. Anytime we feel any sense of dysphoria or disconnection between the way that our brain feels that we are, our heart sees that we are, and the way that we project that, that is all tied to our identity. That is something that doesn't typically change after we have identified how we want to be called, whether it's a pronoun or whatever gender identity that might be. Now, our names, absolutely a preference. Oftentimes, as I mentioned at the very beginning, folks will either call me Rebecca, they'll call me Alejos. I have folks that, within my social and personal circles who have a different name for me that I wouldn't use at work. So our names can always be a preference. And I like to tell folks because, we have faculty who say, I can't change your name on my roster unless I have legal documentation, or I'm not going to call you this name. Leslie, if you prefer Tim, I'm not going to do that because, again, it's a challenge to my worldview, right? But what I like to tell folks is if William is saying, please call me Billy, you're quick to change that on a roster. If Susan says, please call me Sue, this is what I prefer, we do it without question. But if Alejo says, please call me Bob from now on, people are like, whoa, wait a minute, because your gender identity doesn't quite match with the way that I see you. I can't make that adjustment. But it's absolutely a preference how we choose to be called. It's not a preference how we choose to identify.
Thank you. If I may, for everyone, because of the time, we would like to hold any and all questions during our break when she can answer those questions because of the time constraint that we have. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you again. I really, I like being able to provide that clarification. So as we are starting to look at the data for our students, we're going to notice that all 5 generations within our higher education system are going to identify. So think about the students who are coming in, first year students. This 19.7% are identifying as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. 13.1% is bisexual, 4.4 is gay, 1.9 is transgender. So we are seeing an increase. Now, when we look at our millennials, there is also a large number, 11.2% of our millennials. So those possibly some of our veteran students, some of our non-traditional students. And here again, our Gen X, 3.3% of Gen X are identifying. So if you are looking at this is a large number of students who are falling under this umbrella, which means that there are some things that we need to do with our practice to ensure that they're feeling safe and affirmed. Because unfortunately, according to national data, sexual orientation was the second most motivating bias for hate crimes at post-secondary institutions. And 60% of our transgender women, men, are non-binary, gender queer, gender questioning, or gender that's not listed, fear for their physical safety due to their gender identity or their perceived sexual orientation. And if our students are not able to feel safe on our campus, then we know that's going to be reflected in their academic success or their trajectory. If they're persisting, if they're matriculating, if they're graduating, if they're transferring, we might lose them. We see a lot of data about our minoritized students. Well, some of our students who are minoritized students might also be LGBTQIA. So we also have to take that into consideration, these multiple and intersecting identities, and how that's really impacting our students in the classroom. When we see students experiencing harassment, we have to be absolutely adamant about stopping that behavior. 65% of our students who are transgender or gender nonconforming are experiencing harassment in classrooms, and this is not just from their peers. This is from faculty, from administrators, from leadership, from folks across campuses. So I would like to share a quick spoken word with you. It's not something I'm performing, but I also want to preface this. When we are sharing the stories of our transgender, gender nonconforming folks, we always want to use their voice, their perspective. Oftentimes they don't want to speak for themselves, so other folks will do it for them. But what we should never do is co-opt their story, make it our own. So the two young ladies in this spoken word piece do not identify as transgender women, but they do share experiences and the stories of our transgender youth in the classroom. So we're going to take some time. I want you to listen to this. One of the young women, unfortunately, before the spoken word was recorded, was having a little bit of issues with her voice. So just want to apologize for that, but I have yet to find a more crisp, clear reading. So let's get started here.
Melissa sits in the back of the classroom, afraid to speak up. She pulls awkwardly at her extra loose khaki cargo pants. She doesn't want the boys to notice her.
James finds himself in the back of the classroom. His baseball cap casts a shadow on his pimple-stained forehead. A wide shirt hangs on his broad shoulders. But no one ever noticed him.
Melissa, the teacher asks. And she says nothing because she is not here. And Melissa has never been here because Melissa is just some abstract jumble of syllables that doesn't fit her position. She's not what she seems. She doesn't want to have to explain to her mother for the 232nd time why she doesn't want to wear a dress to prom. Doesn't paint her face, it's because the whole body's painted on. Melissa.
James doesn't want to have to explain where he came from. Because with the exception of Melissa, he has been deemed an abstract reality by everyone. All he wishes for is to get to wear a tuxedo to prom.
And Melissa has been tugging at breasts steadily growing for 3 years now. Been using duct tape to press them down and mold them more into pecs. She just wishes that people would understand that at birth, her genitals didn't know which way to grow. Mad at God who couldn't relay the message directly to her hormones that they should produce more testosterone. The only person who understands her is James. And they've been playmates since the age of 4, around the time girls notice boys.
And boys notice girls.
See, James's family wanted daughters
instead of sons.
And Melissa was always like that male beetle that everyone called a ladybug. Melissa, where is she? Sometimes she wishes she could rip the skin off her back. And every moment of every day she feels tossed in the flesh of a stranger. Melissa! And she stands to her feet, wanting to say, I'm here, and I've been here since I was born. So quit asking me if I'm a him or a her. Because when you combine the two pronouns, you get H-I-R, here. And God combined the two genders and put me in this body transgendered. I'm here, so quit talking about me like I'm not here. James falls back into Melissa's skin, and the two comfort each other in their syncopated heartbeats, waiting for the day when Melissa can finally scrub off this made-up genetic makeup. When the teacher asks for James, and he can say,
I'm here.
Give it up for Philadelphia!
So I just want y'all to sit with that for a minute. There's a lot that was just stated in that, and it's very powerful because imagine never being seen, never feeling heard, never knowing why people don't understand who you are. And they made a great point because by age 4, we know our identity, but it's up to other people to either embrace it and let us grow into it or stifle us and punish us for it. So before we move forward, I just want to give you all a couple of minutes to just kind of sit with that and just think about it. And then we're we're going to go over some terms, because I think before we move forward, it's good to get an understanding of what the alphabet soup means, because people like me who grew up kind of in the old school, because I'm years old, I'm used to seeing LGBTQ. And then all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute, what is all this other stuff? And the plus and the plus, plus, plus. So if I was confused, and I teach on this and I'm constantly looking at things, I can understand how other folks are feeling. So again, the LGB is usually what we're used to seeing. So lesbian, a term for women who are sexually and romantically oriented towards others. So we know that orientation doesn't always have to be physical. It can also be romantic. It can also be intellectual. So you will see folks who identify as other things, such as demisexual, which means I'm in love with the way that you speak and think, but I'm not romantically or sexually attracted to you, right? So getting an understanding of that will help us to better understand our students, right? Because oftentimes we perceive orientation just by someone's expression, and they don't always match. So again, lesbian, women, sexually or romantically attracted to one another. Gay is any person attracted to the same gender. We often hear this referred to when we talk about our male or masculine population. And bisexual are those who are sexually and romantically attracted to both identified men and identified women. And then when we see the QIA, folks have embraced and they've adopted queer again. It's not always used as a derogatory term unless it is intentional. So if it's used as an identity, that's great. But if it's a slur, then we need to correct that. Q can also be questioning. Questioning is anyone exploring their sexuality or identity and even their expression. So we might see a lot of students that we're serving who might still be questioning their identity. Intersex, because we live in a dichotomous world, we typically gender folks based off of what they were deemed at birth. Only male, only female. However, we know that biologically there are folks who could also be intersex who have components of both male and female. And then asexual is for folks who don't feel sexual attraction to anyone. You also might see aromantic, which that's folks don't have a romantic attraction to others. So the plus is really important because students might identify as bisexual, pansexual, queer, asexual, or they could use a host of other words that reflect their capacity to be attracted to more than one sex or gender, or not feel sexual attraction at all. The 2S, when we are referring to two-spirit, it is traditionally something that's used by our indigenous folks, our Aboriginal cultures, that they are folks who see a third gender or multiple gender. So the United States, our Western culture, we're one of the only cultures in the world that does not identify a third gender or multiple genders. So you'll see folks in India, you have Hijras, in the Native American and indigenous populations, they do refer to those folks specifically as two-spirit. So it would be beneficial, especially if you were working with folks from around the world, around the globe, which most of us are, to get to understand some of the culture-specific terms that folks use within the LGBTQIA community. Because what we're trying to do is find congruence. Everyone is, whether we're exploring our identity, whether we're exploring our sexual orientation. The process of congruence is ongoing throughout most of our lives as we continue to grow and gain insights into ourselves. It's most often found through exploration. And for some, finding congruence is fairly simple. But for others, it's a much more complex process. But the fundamental need to find gender congruence is true for all of us. And at any degree to which we don't experience it, it can be very distressing. So the naming of our gender that adequately corresponds with our internal sense of who we are is what congruence is. And the ability to express ourselves through clothing, mannerisms, interests, and activities allows us to find more congruence. However, our cisgender, transgender, and those beyond are struggling to find that. And all they are looking for is affirmation. Suicide ideation goes from 73% down to 3% just by honoring someone's pronoun and their preferred name and recognizing their identity. That's a huge impact. But for our transgender folks, congruence is very hard to come by. And it's usually because society has labeled them and misidentified them. So it has forced them to grow into folks that they do not feel comfortable being. So a transgender woman lives as a woman today, but was thought to be male when they were born. A transgender man lives as a man today, but was thought to be female when they were born. Now, the opposite of transgender, you might hear folks refer to themselves as cisgender or cisnormative. This just means that the person assigned sex at birth corresponds with their gender identity, right? How they see themselves and their expression, what they portray to the world. So, for example, someone who is assigned male at birth and who identifies as male is cisgender. And it doesn't have anything to do with sexual orientation. So identity is separate from orientation, and that is separate from expression. So you might hear folks who are not part of the binary. They're gender queer, they are bigender, they are gender expansive. So all of this means that they do not follow all of the norms and standards of what we would identify under strictly male or strictly female. So you might see these terms, but understand that this just means that they do not fit into the confines of what we would call male and female. So you might hear additional terms when folks who are transgender are referring to themselves. So again, couple of acronyms: AFAB, assigned female at birth; AMAB, assigned male at birth; and again, transgender man, transgender woman. Not everyone is in a state of physical and medical transition. So if someone identifies as a trans person, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily changing their physical body. It means that they could be changing their pronoun, could be changing their name, could be changing the way they dress, their hair, their nails, etc. So we've got to make sure that we make the separation. And we should never ask, are you in physical or medical transition? Absolutely not. We should just say, wonderful. What pronouns do you use if you identify as a trans woman? So again, we just want to be respectful and not make any assumptions about our trans identified students or folks that we work with. What we want to do is ensure that we are making room for folks who are gender expansive. We are allowing them to be authentic. We are respecting their names. We are respecting their pronouns. Because again, in our society, in the way that we have been conditioned to think, we're not recognizing anything outside of the dichotomy. It's a huge challenge to the way that we view the world. So again, do some research, because folks coming from other countries might expect us to understand and recognize their gender. So when folks are transgender, gender nonconforming, gender queer, etc., they might be using pronouns that are not what we're used to hearing. She, he, him. Folks often say, I won't use they, them, because they're, that is incorrect grammar. It doesn't make any sense. But I like to argue that if you look up, if you're a literature person and you like to read, you read Emily Dickinson. Dickinson always used they, them series pronouns. So it's not anything new. Pronouns have been defined and redefined for centuries. This is going back to 17, 15, 1400s. There are multiple uses of pronouns. So the ze, zers, ears, he, here, here, all of these pronouns are not anything new. But it's important to note that we should never assume someone's pronouns, so just make sure that you're asking. While the majority of people might use she series or he series pronouns, we can't always tell by looking at someone. Pronouns will commonly have a gender dissociation, so anyone that is not inside the confines of gender might find a pronoun that fits for them. So you'll hear new pronouns, and if you're not sure how to pronounce them or how to use them, just ask. So those folks might say, this is what I prefer, this is how I use it. So for example, the Z-zir, it's pronounced with a Z, that, and it's really weird because I always have to remember how to use it. So I usually ask folks, well, can you give me an example of how you use your pronoun? And most folks will say absolutely. Now, don't panic over pronunciation. I used to all the time. While there are common ways to pronounce these pronouns, there are so many variations. So again, just ask. If someone trusts you enough to share their pronouns with you, then you should probably feel comfortable asking for clarification, especially if you need it. So for example, hey, Tuan, I noticed you use the pronoun XE. I want to make sure I can pronounce that right. Can you tell me how to pronounce it? So it's just as easy as that, right? You might also find yourself in a situation where you hear a pronoun you're not familiar with and you don't know how to use it. So again, just listen, take cues from folks in the community, because although we're not here to constantly teach folks, we will provide some support, but don't always look to folks in the community to guide you, because where I might be comfortable with something, other folks might not be. So it's good just to make those little adjustments, so that way you're not having to remember like who's okay with it, with the you guys, or who's not okay with it. So just be cognizant of it and practice, right? Practice, practice, practice. All you have to do is practice. Look up different pronouns, see how they're used. And again, in our English language, we don't have a gender neutral or third gender pronoun outside of the dichotomy of he, she. So we're not really leaving room for other gender identities, which is often a source of frustration, especially to folks who are transgender or genderqueer. So we want to make sure that we're not limiting or limited by our language, and we want to include those gender neutral pronouns, or we want to make sure that we're practicing equity and equality and honoring the pronouns that folks tell us that they want to use. So when we fail to use pronouns, it's unfortunate because those actions speak way louder than anything else. What we're saying is we don't see you, we don't hear you, we don't value you. This is challenging me. I don't want to make these adjustments. I really prefer not to. And unfortunately, a lot of us, this is where we find ourselves, kind of in the battle. But what we don't want is this to be something that you don't change. So if you feel like as you're reflecting and processing, perhaps there are times where you have failed to use someone's pronoun, where you have failed to use their preferred name, or where you just weren't sure if it was okay to do so. Think about those moments and perhaps reflect on how that person might have felt, or the 3 or 4 folks in that classroom might have felt when you failed to do so. So again, we want to make sure that we're creating safe environments, because the data is showing that our LGBTQIA+ students are being impacted by poor mental health, by bullying, by harassment. And again, it's all because of their orientation or perceived orientation. And so what we're seeing is that students who are LGBTQIA are experiencing and reporting more harassment, bullying than their non-LGBTQIA+ peers. They're also in fear of their physical safety. And so if we are truly trying to create a safe space for our students, it absolutely starts with giving them an opportunity to add their pronouns to the whatever student portal or system that you're using, allowing students to change their preferred name in the same system. So when rosters are available to faculty, it has that person's preferred name or that student's preferred name, because what we don't want is someone to be called by a name that they no longer use, and then their perceived identity based off their orientation or expression, it puts them in danger. So I'll talk a little bit about what that means so we can avoid doing that. Because what our brain fails to do is recognize that identity, orientation, and expression are all very separately, or they're separate. Our identity is that internal knowledge of your gender, right? For example, your knowledge that you're a man or you're a woman or that you're another gender. And that identity is very personal. It's how you in your head think about yourself. And there's often bias related to these identities, especially as it relates to race, socioeconomic status, religion, etc. Now, gender identity may be the same as the sex you were assigned at birth. Again, remember that's cisgender or not transgender. So if your identity doesn't match up with cultural expectations, oftentimes it's hard to navigate the spaces that you occupy. So when people's perceptions do that, then it really impacts the way that we build those relationships. And so what we want to do is just create those safe spaces and affirm folks' identity. Now, we often confuse identity with sexual orientation, but sexual orientation has nothing to do basically with how you see yourself. It's who you're attracted to. It's how you orient to others, right? And again, that could be a romantic orientation, that could be a sexual orientation, but it's that physical, spiritual, emotional, romantic attraction based on someone else's sex, gender identity, or gender expression that's in relation to your own. So the manifestation of sexual orientation is not correlated to gender identity or gender expression. So like gender identity, sexual orientation is internal. It's an internally held knowledge. So everyone has a sexual orientation, even folks who are aromantic or asexual, it's still a sexual orientation. We typically think within intimate relationships that like the sex of the person dictates their identity, but it does not. So when we're talking about orientation, oftentimes it is what we see being portrayed, and our perception is based off of their expression. So someone's expression, that's how they outwardly, express themselves, whether it's their clothing, haircut, behavior, voice, or body characteristics. Oftentimes, the perception based off expression is that person must be part of this community. And oftentimes we're wrong because the way that we show our gender to the world doesn't always match with our identity or orientation. And gender expression also includes the facilities that we use that match either with a person's own sense of their gender or doesn't. And society thinks of these cues, right, as masculine and feminine or female and feminine. But although what's considered masculine and feminine, it changes with time and it's different within cultures. So we should not ever make any assumptions about behavior based off of these three things. So here's a really great video that breaks it down.
Good morning, John. Today, we plumb the depths of the marvelously complex human. But first, allow me to acknowledge that I am not a sociologist. I am also a straight white man who doesn't have to worry about a lot of the hate that a lot of other people do have to worry about. But my goal with this video is I want people to understand, because I think understanding will lead to less hate and also less self-hate. For a lot of people, it's nice to imagine that humans are simple and that you can know a person's sex and then you will know all sorts of things about them deeply and clearly. And if you don't fit into this nice little box, people who do can get really confused and sometimes even angry. And if you yourself don't fit into one of these nice little boxes and you think that people should, then you end up hating yourself. And that's probably even worse. I think the best and maybe only way to solve this problem is for people to understand that there are no nice shiny boxes. Or if there are shiny boxes, there are an infinite number of them, enough to put all of the people who currently exist, have ever existed, and will ever exist. So, together, let's understand. We're going to start simple. What's going on down here in between the legs? That is your sex, your biological sex, and it tends to be binary, though there are all sorts of conditions that result in intersex individuals. And as interesting and complicated as this is, the rest of it is much more complicated, so I'm just going to move on from here, because we all kind of get what sex is. Now we move on up to the top, to the brain, which is the thing that decides what gender you identify with, whether you feel like a man or a woman or neither or both. Because the fascinating thing is, as much as we try to label things, there is no way to label every point on an infinite continuum, and that's what we're dealing with here. So, to actually visualize how this works, I've created a graph for you. On the x-axis, we have gender, male to female, and on the y-axis, we have the intensity of the identification with that gender. I would be about here, because I identify as a man, though I recognize that there are some womany parts of me. But let's also put a hypothetical biological female on the graph that identifies very strongly as a man. Now, that can be really uncomfortable, especially when there's a bunch of people in the world who insist on calling him a woman just because of the body that he happens to be very uncomfortable with, which is why sex does not determine the pronoun you should use. gender does. Now, moving on to your heart, your metaphorical heart, of course. This is who you're attracted to. Men, women, all genders. Again, it's a spectrum, and that spectrum includes intensity, because there are people who don't feel strong sexual attraction at all. That's why asexual is a sexual orientation. A newer idea that I was happy to be exposed to yesterday on Tumblr is the idea of romantic orientation. These are the people that you want to have strong, intimate relationships with, but it sort of separates out the idea that sex has to be the goal or end point or like end all and be all of every intimate relationship. Now that we've dealt with how we feel, let's deal with what happens when other people actually get involved. Now, that's sexual behavior, which is actually very different from sexual orientation. Now, that might seem a little bit strange at first, but it's not. Consider, for example, a heterosexual priest. That priest's orientation is heterosexual, but because of his religion, his behavior is celibate. Here, we're not talking about the preference, we're talking about the behavior. Now, built on top of all of this are gender roles, which are built by societies, not by individuals. The obvious ones are masculine gender roles and feminine gender roles, but as all dichotomies are false dichotomies, this one is a spectrum too. Now that we've sort of gone over all of this, it's important to note that every single one of these categories is independent from each other. So a biological female can be a man who only has sex with women despite the fact that he's attracted to both men and women and kind of feels more comfortable in feminine gender roles. That may not be the most common combination of these factors, but it's certainly not weird. And another important point, many people move across these spectrums, sometimes from year to year, sometimes hour to hour. But what's really important is that we trust ourselves, and we understand ourselves, and we love and respect ourselves, and we grant that same understanding and respect to the people around us. Because when the world becomes one of infinite continuums and those false dichotomies break down, and those 2 shiny boxes break apart into 7 billion shiny boxes, it's actually pretty full.
All right. So it is. It's actually really awesome when we take all of those things away. But we're all going to make mistakes. I've been misgendered. I'll tell you, it's really, really funny to watch parents because they're more embarrassed than children. So real quick story. I was over, San Antonio is notorious for what we call fiesta. And there's all these events that happen around the city. And I present very masculine because I identify as queer, butch lesbian. I've embraced my butchness, right? I turned years old, cut all my hair off. And now little kids, depending on what I'm wearing, will be like, Mom, is that a boy or a girl? And the parent, I'm telling you, I'm standing in line at this fiesta event and I'm waiting because I want to get a funnel cake. And I'm standing in line and I'm thinking about my lemonade, funnel cake, and I notice this little kid is squirming, and mom's gripping the kid's hand tight because you can't lose your kid at fiesta. And that kid keeps staring at me. So I'm really friendly. I'm constantly smiling. I'm thinking, okay, I'm about to have a whole conversation with this 5-year-old kid about funnel cakes. Instead, the kid is whispering at their mother, is that a boy or a girl? And the mom is trying to ignore it. So then the kid gets louder. But Mom, is that a boy or a girl? And the mom is like trying to pull the kid from around the side to the front. But that never works because kids are squirmy. And so the kid just keeps getting louder. The mother's face gets beet red. And I was like, I'm a girl, but I like to wear boys' clothes. And the kid just laughs. And after that, conversation over. It was affirmed, I'm a girl, I like to wear boys' clothes, and he was just as focused on his funnel cake as I was. And that's how easy it is. But when we make mistakes, we have to learn how to recover, right? I've been sirred, but see, because I identify, I'm okay with someone calling me sir. I'm like, whoa, what's going on today? And then, my butchness comes out, and I'm like, yes, thank you, right? But some folks, they get really embarrassed. Or for some folks, it gets very uncomfortable because, again, if they are a trans man, but people keep calling them he, her, or she, her, it becomes hurtful and harmful. And misgendering, it just refers to the experience of being labeled by others as a gender than the one that person identifies with. So me being called sir because I identify as queer and a little bit more butch is almost a compliment. But for other folks, it might be very hurtful because when we make those mistakes, We often don't know how to recover, so then we just keep over, apologizing, and what it does is it basically puts everybody in a really uncomfortable situation. Oftentimes, misgendering is just a mistake, and it just happens, and we're like, oh, my apologies, right? But sometimes it's can be a little intentional, and we want to be responsible for that, because our assumptions can leave a person feeling invalidated or dismissed. So it just takes time to get to know someone better, to maybe help them feel a little bit more respected. When someone uses the wrong pronoun for someone else, it's a very hurtful experience, whether it's intentional or unintentional. It's hurtful because it communicates that the person's gender and experiences are not valid. When someone is misgendered over and over and over, it can cause significant emotional pain. Similarly, dead naming is when the wrong name, usually an old name, is used for someone. This is often seen for individuals using the birth name of a transgender or non-binary person. So what we don't want to do is make any assumptions about how someone would like to be referred to. We do not want to explain away a person's preference based on how it affects us. We don't want to refer to a person by a previous identity or dead naming. We absolutely do not want to out a person. Outing is us sharing someone's identity, orientation with folks who do not know. And a person might come out to you, but they might not be out in other contexts. So you want to make sure that you ask that person, if they do trust you, are you out to everyone, or is this something you're sharing with me? Again, ask for permission. And really, we shouldn't be sharing anyone's identity or anyone's orientation without their permission. We don't want to use offensive slurs, and we definitely don't ever want to ask someone if they are trans. What we do is ask respectfully for a person's pronoun and then commit to using them. We want to refer to a person only by their current identity. So correct yourself if you use the wrong pronoun. Avoid using words like real, regular, or normal, because again, that invalidates folks. But be open, be receptive to feedback from the community about how your language makes them feel. Okay, because again, it's about us creating space. So when in doubt, just ask, right? A simple way to see what pronoun someone uses is to wait and see if it comes up naturally in conversation. If you're still unsure, ask politely and respectfully without making a big deal about it. Sharing your own pronouns is a really good way to bring up the topic. So for example, hi, I'm Alejos and I use they series pronouns. How about you? If you accidentally use the wrong pronoun, just remember to apologize and just move on. It's like getting an award. Shake, take, and make. That's it. Don't make a big deal out of it, because again, it's a little bit awkward and it often draws unwanted attention to the person who identifies as LGBTQIA. So again, just ask, what are your pronouns? Which pronouns do you like to hear? Can you remind me which pronouns you like for yourself? But remember, just be prepared to explain why. I want to make sure I get your pronouns right, or I want to be sure that I introduce you or address you correctly. So again, it's just a really quick ask. Be careful though, be careful, be considerate about the questions that you might be asking. There are so many topics that you might be curious about, but it doesn't mean that it's appropriate to ask someone about them. So don't expect folks who are transgender to be comfortable sharing details about themselves. Again, questions that you might not want to answer, you probably shouldn't ask, right? So I like to tell people 2 things to consider. Do I need to know this information to treat them respectfully? If that's a no, then you don't need it. Would I be comfortable if this question was turned around and asked of me, right? And some folks might love to share their life story. They don't mind telling folks everything from day one to current, but not everybody is that comfortable. So just gauge that relationship you have with that person. And if you are an oversharer, don't expect a trans person to be an oversharer as well. So again, just be respectful. Always use the language that that person uses for themselves, and no two people are the same. So you might have one person who is a transgender person who uses different words to describe themselves over somebody else. So just take the lead of each individual, and they're going to show you the language that is best for them. And again, just make those corrections. You can always be respectful of the different types of people you encounter in any given situation by replacing some of the common gender terms with gender neutral options. So when addressing groups of people or people whose pronouns you haven't used, gender neutral language is really important. So everyone, I don't know how many times I hear you guys. If I had a jar that I drop money in, every time I heard you guys, I would have a lot of money right now. But it's a common thing. We think you guys is everyone. We think it's okay. But for some folks who are gender expansive, what we're saying is we're not committed to gender inclusion. We're not going to honor gender diversity because we're going to continue to use gendered language. So instead of you guys, perhaps we could say folks, you all. In Texas, in the South, we say y'all, right? So it's inclusive. It's not giving anything a gender, right? When referring to specific people and you don't want to assume their identity, you can just call them the person, the individual, the person standing over there, and perhaps make gestures. Like I talk with my hands all the time. And we're all like, if my mom heard me not say ma'am or sir, I would get the proverbial look, right? Like, I raised you better than that. But I have to remind myself, although it's polite, and although in certain contexts and in subcultures, right, it's a yes ma'am, no sir, right? But in other spaces, especially now when we're on college campuses and in cafeterias and doing things, perhaps we just skip the ma'am and sir and just say simply good morning or yes, please, or thank you. I have to remind myself all the time not to ma'am and sir folks based off of my perception of their identity. So I'm always making those corrections. Instead of using things like ladies and gentlemen or boys and girls, because we hear that a lot. Perhaps we could use everyone, colleagues, friends, folks, students, children, instead of he or she, they, that person, the client, the guest, the student. Rather than saying men and women, perhaps we could say everyone, people of all genders, all people, men, women, and non-binary people. If we get caught up in the welcome, ladies and gentlemen, take a minute and pause and say, and everyone in between, because you might get some chuckles, you might get some appreciation from the folks in the room, but it just takes us making that quick adjustment, right? And we always say things like freshman or upperclassmen, right? What about upper level student? What about first year student? So again, just thinking about how we're addressing people. People always ask me about Mr. and Miss. Well, the gender neutral is mix, MX. It's not a typo if you see someone type that in. And it is pronounced mix. So if you see someone who uses they, them, their pronouns in lieu of using Mr. this or Miss that, replace it with an X, because the X allows us to be a little bit more inclusive. So it's all about the language that we use, and maybe do some revisions. Look at the material that you're sharing with your community, with your students. Take a look at all of the documents that are posted or signs that are posted. Think about how many times we use man or men or women or the he, she in different documents. Highlight them and see. And perhaps that's an opportunity for you all to make those changes. It's just really quick revisions. Now, in the classroom, again, there are going to be some limitations. There are going to be some challenges, but many of your students are going to be learning about pronouns for the first time. So this is going to be a learning opportunity for them that they might just keep forever. So it's our responsibility as educators to role model before inviting folks to share. Again, just offer your name, offer your pronoun, give an example, Tell us why we're doing this. And if you're consistent with using someone's pronouns and preferred name, students are going to follow your example. So again, ask your students their pronouns and consistently use them correctly. And that will help them determine within the first few minutes of that class if they feel respected. So just provide opportunities for folks to share. That's going to show that you're not assuming what their gender identity is based off of their appearance. You can also remove birth or given names from your class records and rosters or attendance sheets, and perhaps use a last name or use the name that the student has given you. I also encourage folks to use a syllabus inclusion or pronoun statement in their documents that they share with students, or even putting them in the signature of your email. That also says a lot. It shows that your commitment to being inclusive. The essential thing to do after learning someone's pronoun, again, is just remember to use it. If you use the wrong one by accident, just correct yourself and begin using the right pronoun. Again, we're setting the example. We're leading by example, and that's the important part of it. There might be folks who say, I don't want to share my pronouns. I don't really understand this. I'm not really comfortable doing this. And that's okay, because we don't have to share our pronouns. We can just say, hey, use my name. That's okay. We should never force anyone to share their pronouns. Again, we don't know if someone is out to everyone. We don't know what context they're out in. So we don't want to force anyone to share pronouns. A couple of things, just my name, no preference, mix it up. No pronouns for me. You know, it's up to each of us how we choose to share our part of our identity with others. And again, we just want to be respectful. So some people use different names, different pronouns, depending on where they are. So it's helpful just to clarify what situations that person uses those pronouns in. So again, you might have someone who might identify as a trans woman at school, but when they go home, or when they're at work, that's not who they are. So it's best just to understand that. Again, we don't want to out anyone. We don't want to put anybody in harm's way. So outing is when someone discloses sexual orientation or identity of an LGBTQIA+ person without their consent. And again, it creates issues of privacy, choice, harm. It's harmful in that it can traumatize the person that's being outed. It can also lead to someone experiencing violence or possibly putting them in a dangerous situation. So even if the risks you think aren't that severe, it's still not acceptable to share someone's identity without their consent. An outing can be illegal in some instances. So if, you know, right now there's a lot of policy in the K-12 system that is putting pressure on school administrators, on their parents and families about whether or not students can be out. So we want to make sure that there isn't anything that could potentially happen to our students or their families that could put them in a legal situation. So again, just be careful with the way that we choose to share information about the students that we're serving. If someone wants to share their identity with other people, that decision's up to them. But if someone shares it with you, just get their consent. It's always best just to proceed with caution when talking about someone's identity, especially if that person isn't comfortable being out. So essentially, we don't want to put them in danger, and we don't want them to have any type of consequence that could lead to putting them in danger or a severe, situation. So just be mindful, be confident in the fact that they're sharing this with you and they're trusting you with this information, and just make sure that you're not disclosing it. Always think about what you're saying before you speak about folks, because sometimes it happens you accidentally out someone and you're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I just did that. So, just talk to that person, let them know, that it was an accident or whatever the situation is. But again, it's about their safety. It's about their respect. It's about their identity. It's not necessarily about our comfort with their orientation, expression, or identity. So again, remember, it's not yours to share. So whatever someone shares with you, just keep it with you. And, again, just check in on them. Have you told anybody else? Is there, do you need help with this? Are you experiencing anything where you might need some support? So just make sure that we're not doing anything that's going to put them in harm's way. And again, all you have to do to start is make your commitment visible. They have these really great pronoun pins that you can purchase. I like this one because it has the they, them, their series pronouns, but they have them in multiple little buttons. You can get name tags that have a space for your name and a space for your pronoun. When I mention inclusion statements, this is something as simple as stating, I consider this classroom, this meeting space, etc., to be a place where you will be treated with respect. And I welcome individuals of all ages, backgrounds, beliefs, ethnicities, gender identities, gender expression, national origins, religion, affiliation, sexual orientations, ability, and all other visible and non-visible differences. All members of this class, meeting, space, etc., are expected to contribute to respectfully welcoming and inclusive environment, right? So you're just stating it. Pronoun statement. I will gladly honor your request to be addressed by an alternate name or gender pronoun. Please advise me of this preference early in the semester so that I can make appropriate changes to my record. So again, just a matter of putting these statements out, letting people know. If you have a sign-in table with a roster, include a note that says, we are including pronouns. We're working to make our spaces more inclusive of our transgender, gender nonconforming, or gender non-binary folks. Again, name tags, right? We encourage you to fill in the pronoun section of your name tag with your name so we can use the correct pronouns when referring to each other. So again, you're setting the example, you're making your commitment visible. And it just takes practice. My Pronouns includes tips on how to ask and share pronouns. The Transgender Student Educational Resource Center has a really great Pronouns 101. The practice and use of pronouns, that's a really good place. And because I'm an NPR fan, I always like to share their guide to understanding gender identity. These have all been shared with Tuan, so he will be able to share these with you. In addition, Minus 18 is an online network that is driven by LGBTQ plus youth in Australia. So what they've done is they've created a wonderful app that allows you to practice with pronouns and what we call neo-pronouns. So everything outside of the he, she, they, them, their would be considered a neo-pronoun. The V, veer, the Z, zir, the he, here. So when you hear neo-pronouns, those are the new pronouns for all of the expansive identities that our youth are identifying with. Now, being an ally takes a lot. It's a lot of work, and it requires a lot of action. Everybody is on a different space, like different place in their journey. You could be at the very beginning where you're like, I'm just learning about identities. I had no idea that it wasn't tied to orientation. I wasn't sure about expression. I'm just learning about pronouns. That's the very beginning, the education part, the place where you're doing some self-reflection, you're making those corrections. Then we also have folks who are at the very other spectrum, right? At the end of the journey, not even in, but at the other end of it, right? Where they understand this, they're interrupting. They're not just allies, but they are accomplices. They're doing work. They're impacting spaces for change, affirming identities, and being inclusive. So you might move along this spectrum of allyship, and that's okay. Sometimes we have to take a step forward and then 3 back to recover, and that's okay. But the fact is that it's an active approach to making change. We've got to be active. We've got to be visible. We've got to make sure that we're interrupting behavior that puts our students and our colleagues who identify at risk. Again, there's over 200 pieces of legislation right now that are being considered that are going to impact our youth in K-12 and also in higher ed. So it takes all of us being educated and educating others to ensure that we're creating these safe spaces. Our students are under attack. Those who are athletes are being told they can't compete. Those who want to use a restroom that aligns with their identity are being told absolutely not. So I ask folks who say, yes, we're allies, we do things on our campus. My question is, how many gender neutral bathrooms do you have? Not the ones in a wellness center, not the ones in a gym by the showers, but in your buildings that are not new buildings. Because in Texas right now, one of the things that we have to do when we build a new building on our campus is include gender neutral bathrooms. But we have one brand new building on our campus. There are 9 on our campus. If a student is in an academic building, it's going to take them, and I timed it, 7 minutes to get across campus to our wellness center to use the gender neutral bathroom and back to the academic building. Now, this was door to door. If I was on the 2nd floor or 3rd floor having to go across campus, it might take a little bit longer. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm one of those people who waits till the last minute to answer an email or send an email or do something really, really quick before I go to the restroom. I don't have a teacher bladder, but it's pretty close because, you know, we're constantly moving, we're constantly doing things. But imagine going throughout your whole entire day, not eating, which I can't, I like to eat, not drinking, which I'm drinking water all day, to avoid going to the bathroom. Now, this is the experiences that our colleagues and our students are having on our campuses because someone is uncomfortable with a trans woman being in the ladies' restroom. People are uncomfortable with me being in the restroom, oftentimes because of the way I present, especially if I'm in a suit. You know, I'm feeling confident, I'm suited, I'm booted, walk into the restroom, I get double takes. I feel like I always have to verbalize a hello, how are you, in order to make people feel comfortable, in order for them to hear my voice and say, oh, that's not a man walking into the restroom. I hear a female voice. I feel a little more at ease. I shouldn't have to make an announcement when I go to the restroom. And neither should our students, neither should my fellow colleagues who identify. So again, if we're being allies and we're actively working to support our students, we have to take inventory, not just of the language that we're using, the marketing that we're sharing, but the spaces that we've created. What's going on our campus? And if we're saying we're inclusive, then are we really inclusive once we take inventory? Being a trans ally goes beyond that too, because again, remember, identifying as someone who is trans doesn't always mean medical. It's the pronoun, it's the name, it's respecting that outward expression. You know, today I worked with a student who had a full beard and the most beautiful rose printed skirt. Everybody in my hall came out to compliment them about their outfit. Now, that affirmed that student. That student lit up because everyone recognized them. And that's what it is. That's what it means to be a trans ally. And I'd like to share this because this had an impact on me. We always say we see you, we hear you, but do we really, right? So I learned a term, and it's such an amazing way of saying hello, right? When folks in the Zulu Nation, when they greet each other, they don't look at each other, right? So we do this a lot. We say, hi, how are you? We're not really asking how you are. We're just being polite as we pass you by. But in the Zulu Nation, they give you an opportunity to either be seen or not. So when someone says, sawubona, that means I see you, I value you, you're here in front of me, I want to be with you. If someone does not want to be seen, they don't respond. But if they do, they say, yebo sawubona, which means I am here, I am seen, I am heard. Now imagine if we walk through life seeing and hearing and valuing our LGBTQIA plus folks. We probably wouldn't be reporting high levels of suicide ideation. We wouldn't be reporting high levels of anxiety and harassment and bullying. You know, we might be reporting success. We might be reporting students who are thriving in their college campuses and excelling at the things that they're doing because they are valued, seen, and heard. It changes the way people see us and work with us. So we need to provide more than just what we call lip service, right? We're not just checking boxes to say we've got all these key terms. Yes, diverse. Yes, inclusive. Yes, affirming. But how? Like, show me how we're doing that. And a really good way of doing that is, again, it's visibility. So go to events, support events that are happening on your campus, bring them to your campus, bring Disclosure, the documentary about trans folks in Hollywood. Bring speakers to provide opportunities for students to see folks doing work that look like them, that represent who they are. But most importantly, it's speaking up and speaking out. We're always so afraid to interrupt behavior, especially because we have such an interesting power dynamic in higher education. Oh, I can't tell my dean he was offensive. Oh no, I would never tell the VP that they really said something incorrectly. I don't know about you, but I am over that. I'm over hurting feelings. I have stopped a keynote speaker at a conference and said, wait a minute, the language you just used was not inclusive. And I'll tell you what, my president was there and she looked at me and was not quite sure what was about to happen. But that speaker paused, acknowledged their mistake, made the correction. When they were done giving their speech, they came to our table. They talked to my president first, which was great. I was like, thank you so much, right? I thought I was going to get fired when I got back. Then he tells my president, I am so glad that you have folks like this on your campus. It takes courage to be able to do that. And here I'm sitting like, oh my goodness, I'm not going to have a job. They're about to fly me home from Tennessee by myself. I'm going to have to go pick up the stuff from my office. But it didn't happen that way. But it was that leader self-reflecting and saying, you know what, I made a mistake. I need to correct this. And I'm okay making that mistake. And I'm okay correcting it. Oftentimes, people don't know what they're doing because we just let it slide. We let it happen over and over. But if you pull them to the side, be respectful and say, you know what you said really impacted me. And I'm sure it might have impacted other people. Perhaps we could consider this, right? Again, just be respectful. Interrupt, but be courageous. And sometimes our voice is going to shake. We might even cry a little bit because we're so uncomfortable, but we don't know the impact that that's going to have on other people in the room. People did come up to me and say, I'm so glad you said that. That was great, right? And other people were like, wow, that was really brave. I'm okay with both. I'm going to speak up. Sometimes I'm the only one speaking up, but then eventually other people join me. And that's what's going to happen is allies can be a very lonely road. People make assumptions about allies. People say, I don't want to be an LGBTQIA plus ally because I don't want people to think that I'm also gay. But that's not what it's about, right? That's not what we do. So support these events, build up on these holidays and cultural things that happen. We have a National Coming Out Day in October. We have a whole Pride Month in June. Friday, the 31st of March is Transgender Day of Remembrance. So there are opportunities for us to celebrate the culture and subcultures of the LGBTQIA plus community. It just takes us being educated and asking students, what do you want to see on our campus? If you don't have a Genders and Sexualities Alliance or an LGBTQIA plus affirming student organization, consider it. If you do, perhaps present on it to other institutions so they can also model that and bring that to their campus, because nothing in higher ed is original, right? We co-opt it, we make it our own, but that's what you have to do. Who are you serving? And is it something that they need on your campus? And if you're doing it, tell people how great your organization is and show the data about the impact of those students involved in those groups, the impact that it's having on their social development and on their academic success. So I always tell people, share what you're doing. If you're not really sure what to do or how to support students, there's all kinds of national organizations that will guide you. Gleason has great resources for educators, for families, for students. There's a lot of great information on Lambda Legal, especially if you have students who are wanting to change their gender marker on legal documents, or if they want to change their name. The Human Rights Campaign will offer different presenters, or if you have resource events or college fairs and you're looking for people to table, look up your local HRC. I'm sure they would be willing to come out, table an event for you. Just do some research, look up different places, not just locally, but regionally and nationally, because if your students are leaving your college and going to another school, perhaps they're going out of city, out of state, you might want to connect them with those resources that they might need there as well. So if you're wondering how to get involved as an ally, there are so many different places. And again, ally organizations are not always just about the LGBTQIA plus community, because we have so many folks who have intersecting identities. We want to know how to work with our trans folks of color. We want to know how to work with our indigenous folks. We want to know how to work with our parents who might have students who are coming out. And so they're saying, hey, what are y'all doing over there at Triton College? My kid is gay now. And you're like, whoa, we're supporting them in their transition. Let's see what we can do to give you some information about how to help that student as they're coming out and going through this process, right? So again, it's about educating, it's about sharing that information. Because I speak Spanglish, I like to call it the comadre effect. Comadres are like your really close friends, the ones that you're like, hey, I heard about this, let me share this with you. And if you look at history, right, most of the information related to educating youth usually starts with women. If you tell the women in a tribe or a village that you're about to teach them to do something, they're probably going to teach their children. So that's why I like to call it the comadre effect. Hey, I learned about this really great family acceptance project. Perhaps you should take a look at it. Give resources. Again, make these places visible for folks to see. What I like to tell people is there are so many opportunities for us to give our students a helping hand by just posting something. Students look around. They check things out when they're waiting for an appointment, when they're waiting to talk to someone. They're not always looking at their phone. Oftentimes they'll look up. So if they see these helpful numbers posted, that again says you're committed to their safety, their well-being, and you're going to interrupt any behavior that could prevent them from thriving on your campus. I like to tell people, if you have student IDs, maybe you put the hotline number on there that says, for our students who are LGBTQIA+, we want to make sure that you feel safe. So here's a number if you ever feel like you can't speak to someone. Post these, put them somewhere, let them know that it's available. There's so many different resources for us, especially as we begin to see more of our students coming to our campuses who identify as transgender. So we need support, they need support, their families need support. So again, we just want to make sure that they know that you are willing to provide that for them. Now, if you're like me and you like to read, I'm constantly reading. These are some really good articles and guides for you to begin to start to learn a little bit more about gender neutral language, about non-binary pronouns, about things that really matter to our students and their identity and their development. So this piece is part of my thesis. I'm actually in my last semester of coursework. I'll be taking my qualifying exam in May. So a lot of this is part of the research that I'm doing to support LGBTQIA+ students in the classroom, specifically our Butch identified students. So these resources I found very valuable in understanding how to dismantle oppressive systems, how to challenge education policy, and how to support educators in the classroom who are working with students who are identifying outside of the binary and more gender expansive. So I welcome any questions. I welcome you connecting with me on social media. This is my Instagram. That is my Twitter. That is my personal email. So if you have questions, if you want to talk through a situation or a scenario, I'm okay doing that. If that helps you get a better understanding about how to navigate these spaces, how to interrupt behavior, how to use pronouns, because again, it's about our students' comfort and about making sure that they feel supported in our classrooms so that they can thrive. That's what we want. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate you sharing space with me today. So I'm going to pause for a minute and transfer this over and pass the virtual mic back to Tuan. So if you have questions, I am ready to provide some answers for you.
Thank you. We are opening up the conversation. If anyone wants to raise their hand in virtual land and ask our presenter, I think you did a wonderful job. I want to say one thing, in Rebecca. We do have a neutral club here, which is called Common Ground, and I'm the advisor for the organization, and it is for our students who feel that they want to feel a comfortable place where they want to just come and talk about issues on campus, and then also for all of you, Common Ground, being the advisor, brought up the issue as well too about pronouns. So they actually had a wonderful conversation about that in 2 of their sessions, about how some of our colleagues here on campus are not using the appropriate pronoun for them. So I'm glad you did bring that up, because there are some individuals here, and I say for our students, and like I said, as the advisor, they felt it was comfortable to talk about it, that they really want our instructors, our colleagues, our administrators, staff, to feel comfortable with the pronouns that they are being selected or to identify themselves.
That is great. So there are scholarships and grants for students in organizations and clubs like that. If you're interested, I can share those with you. I was just sent a list of potential grants that are national to support LGBTQIA+ initiatives on college campuses.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. Are there any questions for our wonderful presenter? Don't be shy.
Safe space. This is a safe space.
We are in a safe. Yes, Magda.
I'm sorry, my camera is goofy today, so you will just hopefully hear me. Rebecca, first of all, thank you so much for your time and for joining us at Triton. It was really insightful. I believe this is a very valuable topic, and your resources really gonna greatly help many of us go to the next level. I consider myself well-rounded in the topic. I advocate for the LGBTQ community for past at least 4 years, as well as I'm teaching sexuality based on our whole life program. I'm not sure if you know it. And your information added me another layer. So I wanna really, really thank you for coming today.
Thank you. And you know, Magda, my research brain is like, we need to get together and perhaps we can write up a chapter together or work on something to get published.
Well, you're talking my language, so we'll figure out. I have your email, so I will be in touch.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yes, Gina.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. You're on speaker.
Okay, this might be overthinking it, but if some people might be uncomfortable talking about it, and we're not supposed to, unintentionally out people or things like that, does asking though for like pronouns and things, can that cause any conflict or issues?
It absolutely can. So when you do, just say, preface it with your comfort level, right? You always want to say that. To your comfort level, we're going to do introductions. People get nervous doing introductions anyway. So just sharing a name sometimes makes people really anxious, like, oh my God, I don't want them to call on me. And then they forget their name when it's their turn. So, just make sure that you set the tone. It's up to you what you want to share, but this is what we would like to hear: your name, your pronoun, maybe your favorite food. And if somebody says, well, what is a pronoun? That gives you an opportunity to explain. But again, you want to make sure that people feel comfortable, because they might not be out. They might not want to share their pronouns. So we just want to respect if they say no pronoun, okay, we'll call you by your name. And if they say not that name, okay, well then what name would you like us to call you? And it just makes it easy. So you just preface it, set the tone, check the comfort level, and when you kind of get a feel for the room, you'll sort of know when folks feel a little bit uncomfortable. You just kind of lay the groundwork, and like I said, just set the tone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I may add, I have a student this semester who's going through transition, and the student in the beginning told me, when you mentioned about new pronouns, mentioned a new one to me, but I've never even heard. But the student in this case said X, and I'm like, okay, I acknowledged it. I said, yes, I will call you X with not a problem whatsoever. So I agree with Rebecca. Sometimes we may just want to ask in this case, and it's not to be rude or anything, but a lot of times we do have individuals on our campus, for all of you, who are going through those transitions. And since we're now using pronouns very heavily, it is very important for us to acknowledge that. And like I said, for my student, every class, I say, hello, X, how you doing? And the student always acknowledged, and the student appreciates that, because the student did not identify as a woman nor male, but they preferred that pronoun of X, which, like I said, it was a new one, because I was like, that's new. And I'm in that generation of learning and adapting to it. And right now, the student has told me that they withdrew from one of their classes, and this was today, because the student I meet with on Mondays and Wednesdays. They withdrew from one of their classes because the instructor, our colleague, did not acknowledge that, and they just couldn't deal with it anymore.
Yep. I mean, we see the data, right? We see the data about our Black and brown young men. We're losing them, right? We're losing our Black and brown young men to everything but college. But we're losing our LGBTQIA plus students to something even more detrimental. They're not just going to jail. They're attempting suicide. And some of them are successful. And we have so many students who absolutely at high rates will have suicide ideation or attempt suicide because people fail to recognize who they are. I mean, think about it. I mentioned this statistic earlier. 73% of our students, suicide ideation before transition. And remember, transition meaning expression, identity, pronoun. That went down to 3% after being affirmed. I mean, I can't understand how we wouldn't want to make that adjustment. Like, I don't know why we don't, and again, it's our comfort, it's our worldview, it's our perception of things that we have to challenge ourselves. It's that cycle of socialization. Remember, we see it all the time in sociology and social work and psychology with Harrow, right? It's that cycle of socialization. Once we interrupt that for ourselves and for our students, it changes everything. It changes the way we interact and engage with each other and the world. And that's all it takes. It takes that little bit of reflection, like, wow, what did I just say? How did that impact folks? We have to read the room. If you're not reading the room and you're standing in front of a classroom as a professor, there's a miss there, right? So we've got to pay attention. And I think that question too is, if someone doesn't feel comfortable, you're going to recognize that. And perhaps after class say, hey, Tuan, I saw that during introductions you felt a little uncomfortable. Do you want to talk about why, so I can get a better understanding? And again, that's you doing that personal check. Like, okay, maybe I need to do something a little bit different here, engage the student a little bit differently. And that just takes you talking to the student. We encourage our students to come talk to us, but how open are we if we need to talk to them? So bridge it. Make sure you're doing that. And I'm telling you, it will change everything. That student will light up when you remember their pronoun, when you remember their preferred name. They really do. Just like us, when someone says our name and we're like, oh, they knew my name. Like, it's very impactful. And remember, pronouns are just as important as names. So people will feel it. I promise you, they will.
You
Maureen?
have,
Oh, sorry.
yes, Maureen, go ahead.
Hi. I was wondering, what if you mentioned before that during the introduction, somebody might say, you give the option of share your pronoun if you feel comfortable doing it. So if somebody doesn't share the pronoun, then I'm just wondering, then what do you do? Like, how do you move forward with that student as far as addressing them?
So if they just want to be referred to by their name, that's what we do.
Oh,
Tuan is
okay.
in class today. Yeah, Tuan submitted his assignment today. Tuan is out of class today. Tuan won't be here. I mean, it's just, we're not going to gender it. We're not going to use a pronoun and say he's not here today. Just
Okay.
replace it with the name. So again, name and pronoun are synonymous. And so if you're not using the name, you could use a pronoun. If they don't have a pronoun, we'll revert back to their name.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
No problem.
If I may, for all of you, there's some workshops, conferences right now, national conferences that actually have and will display stickers that individuals who are coming to the conference to put pronouns. For example, on my ID, I know you probably can't see it, I got this sticker from NASA. They had stickers for the pronouns, and I thought it was the coolest thing. I gathered several for myself, and yes, it does have the pronouns that I go by, and that's why I thought this was a wonderful concept to bring here to try, because we are using it within our emails, and some of us within our communication and also within our speech. But we do have individuals, like I said, for my student X, in this case, I hated to hear that the student withdrew from the class because one of our colleagues did not acknowledge them in the classroom. Yeah, and again, the student is part of the Common Ground, so therefore that's why they took my class, because I'm the advisor. But I feel really bad for them because they're trying to get their education and feel like they're a sense of belonging on campus. And they didn't feel that way with our colleague in the classroom because the student wanted to be called pronoun X. Again, it was new to me too. And our colleague just wouldn't acknowledge it. And no, I'm going to do this. And yeah, then the student just couldn't take it anymore and just withdrew from the class. So if you are attending conferences or workshops outside of Triton, there are individuals, there are conferences and workshops that are doing that. They are promoting the pronouns because it is something that's not going just in Texas or Illinois. It is going across the nation into other institutions because of those reasons. We want our students to be they want them to be belonging, a sense of belonging, but we also want them to feel that they have a space and they're safe on campus, and that we do, like Rebecca was saying, we acknowledge them as well too. Elizabeth? Mm-hmm. Yes, Elizabeth, we have you, caller.
Hi, I'm trying to just turn on my microphone and video.
We hear you, caller. Hi.
Okay, wonderful. Alejos, I just want to say thank you so much for giving such specific information and direction, because this is a very important conversation and it's very new to our campus. I think the information that you've provided today is really foundational, and there's probably a lot of work we need to follow up with to make sure that our students feel heard, feel seen, and feel safe. Something I wanted to mention, and Leslie Wester might want to follow up with this, the correct use of students' pronouns is actually required of us as educators. Under Title IX, we're violating a student's rights, and we're creating a hostile environment and harassment if we don't do so. So while it's wonderful to have the educational aspect, it's also important for us to be very clear as educators that this is our obligation. So I think I'll just mention that and then leave that open if somebody, Title IX is a very important piece of legislation for the protection of everybody on campus. If somebody wants to follow up with more info, I'm not the expert, but I do think it's so important that we be aware.
Absolutely. And so many folks are afraid. Like as soon as you say, hey, this is a Title IX violation, I guarantee you automatically there's going to be an assessment, there's going to be a conversation, there's going to be a rounding to determine like what can we do to fix this, because that's absolutely not something that we want to have on our campuses. Yeah. And most people won't, they might know it is, but students are not going to address it and say, hey, like fortunately for X, Tuan, they have you, right? But other students might not have somebody on campus that they can go talk to. And perhaps they would have withdrawn from all of their classes and you wouldn't have seen them again. But because they do Title IX at the very beginning, they don't really understand how it applies to them later, right? So I think that's a good point, just reminding folks like, hey, these are some things that protect you, and this is included in there, because we forget that. Even folks who are practicing, we're challenged and we're like, hey, that could be a Title IX violation, and then I bet you they'll change their mind about the use of pronouns and such. So thank you for bringing that up, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you. Magda, you're on a call.
Elizabeth, thank you for bringing this up, because I'm facing actually right now very homophobic students in a class. And he knows he pushes my buttons when he starts speaking up negatively. And I address him a couple of times. And because I think I addressed him, he thinks it's funny to keep on going. And I right now have more ammunition in my hand, so I can very quickly just shut this down. Thank you.
Absolutely. You've got to be armed as allies. I tell people you move from being an ally to an accomplice pretty quickly, especially when you're challenging other people, because you have to do it respectfully. You have to make sure that you call people in, right? So we don't want to call them out. We want to call them in. And when you call someone in, it drops their defenses, because immediately you're saying, hey, let me just bring you into this. Let me give you the why behind it. And you tie some feeling, you tie some emotion, it changes it. But I tell people you can't call us out, because immediately if you call me out, I'm going to be on the defensive and I'm not going to hear anything you say. So call people in. Just like we call you into the closet, we're not coming out anymore. We're actually letting you into our space. We have to remember that as allies, we've got to call other people into the space, and just, I tell people, get clumsy and start dropping knowledge everywhere you go, and let people know this is not what I stand for. People at work and the people who like to test me will say stuff like, oh, here comes the diversity police, and I'm like, absolutely, be on your P's and Q's, because we're not going to allow you to make people feel less than, and I will own it. Because I do want people to understand that this is about equity. This is about relationship building, right? We're always talking about building cultures of care on our campuses, but it's not just for our students, it's for each other. So if you have colleagues who identify, imagine how they're feeling in a meeting when they're misgendered or someone refuses to use their name and pronoun. Now, the student is probably going to feel 1,000 times worse, because now they don't have anybody that they can talk to. So, we've just got to make sure that when those students make fun, or they're being homophobic, or they're doing these things, we just kind of hold up the mirror and say, you know what? Like, what you're saying is having an impact on everybody in this room. Do you want to tell us why you did that? I do it all the time when people say, oh, no homo, or, oh, that's kind of gay. And I'm like, really? So explain to me, and I just want to get more information about why you said this, or I want to know, exactly your viewpoint. Like, I heard you say this about this person who identifies as trans. So why did you say that? And just have that conversation with them respectfully. I would tell people, don't call them out, pull them to the side, perhaps do something, after class, and just say, there's this level of respect that we need to have in here, and you're really not living up to that, right? Because we always want to ask for respect, but we don't model how to give it. And so I think that gives us a really good opportunity to model that behavior, and try to do it all the time. We've got to start walking the walk, because we're doing a lot of talking. But now I'm ready to have people walk with me. So I appreciate you all, taking time to really reflect on these things and ask these really tough questions and think about things on your own and then ask other people the tough questions. So thank you, because not everybody takes time to do that, and that says a lot about what you value, and that says, it speaks to our students more than you will ever know.
Thank you. For those who did not see within the chat area, the counseling department does offer an opportunity for you to contact them and to come to your classrooms to talk about being safe on campus, and providing a safe place as well too. And Mary, who's one of our wonderful counselors, as long as Leslie, who's one of our wonderful counselors in the counseling department, has offered in the chat area their email address for those who would like to reach out to them, and also have them maybe come to your class and do a short talk in regards to being a safe place. And right, we as educators are providing our students here at Triton College a safe environment, not only for them to be themselves, but to get the education they're also desiring that they want, and a place where they can be them, I know redundancy, themselves in this case. If they want to be who they are, we are doing the same thing in the classroom. We're being who we are. We should allow our students to be the same way. Are there any other questions for? All right, we're educators. We have that quiet. Oh, okay. Thomas, you're our next caller.
So, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
So I wanted to ask, you're talking about we were just talking about bad actors in the classroom, essentially. At what point are we allowed to just get rid of them for repeatedly making our other students incredibly uncomfortable and feeling unsafe? Because I feel like this whole thing about, hey, pull them aside, ask them why they're acting, it's like, I feel that's giving too much credit to people who are bad faith actors by default. If they are saying homophobic or transphobic slurs, I'm at the point in my life where I am done giving people like that the benefit of the doubt and assuming they're just, because experiences time and time again that no, they're out to cause trouble and hurt other people. And at what point do we draw the line and we say get out? Because there's non-binary people in this class, there's LGBT people in this class, and we're not going to put up with this kind of you making everyone feel unsafe anymore. What resources do we have to do that and get rid of essentially a malignant factor in our classroom?
So I want to say, hold on real quick, Twan. Before, I think pulling them aside is more to engage with what they said and the impact, and less of why are you behaving this way? So in class, I heard you make this transphobic remark. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, right? And typically, it's the 5 whys, because, well, why did you say this? And then they answer, well, why do you think that and then you just kind of keep getting to the why. Eventually, if you have the patience to do it, they're going to give you the real reason. Maybe perhaps they have some internal things that they're working through. So that gives you an opportunity to connect them with some counseling. Now, I'm sure Twan is about to tell you exactly what Leslie is saying in the chat. Incident reports. What is your college's policy on reporting behavior in the classroom? What, do you have intervention processes? Do you have behavioral intervention process? Do you have a SOBI team? What does that look like? And I think practice that. But at day 1 of class, basically the first 2 weeks of class, think about census time, right? As your time to set the standard in the classroom. Those inclusive statements, those things that you're doing will really tell the student what your management in the classroom will look like from the day 1 until the end of class. And whatever is in your syllabi regarding those policies, you've got to continue to use those and practice that. Again, it's walking the walk and talking the talk. You put an inclusivity statement in your syllabi, you've got to make sure that you're putting it into action. But understand your reporting process, understand your level, like what you're going to accept in your classroom. If it's every single day, that's your opportunity to say, absolutely not, we're not going to do this. And oftentimes it does take saying it out loud in front of everyone. Let's review my policy. Let's talk about why this is not okay in my classroom. And if it continues to happen, there's going to be some, a significant whatever that could be, right? So just know that policy, it's your classroom. You own that classroom, and you can manage it according to how your institution allows you to. Twan?
And yes, you're right. I was going to back that up, and Leslie had put something in the chat area regards that, Thomas. And I'm going to open it up for Leslie to continue to talk about that in regards to the incident report.
Thanks, friend.
Thanks.
So first step is exactly what everyone's talking about in terms of protect yourself in your syllabus, go over classroom management, have those one-off conversations like Alejos is recommending with your student. But if it's becoming a trend, incident reports can be your friend. So incident reports are what you can do for conduct, for behavioral intervention team concerns, and then there's also a Title IX report. So like Dr. Collins had mentioned about if there's sexual discrimination occurring in the classroom, or a student discloses to you that they feel that they're being discriminated based off of their gender, you have a duty to report. So that would be the Title IX report. But if in terms of what's occurring in your classroom with a student, that would be something that I would say first do some classroom management. But if it's a trend, incident reports are going to be your friend. The dean of students would get those, and then depending on if it's BIT or conduct, and if you're not sure, it's okay, we figure it out. But the behavior intervention team, which involves myself and Mary, which is why Mary put the link to the incident report in there, we would be a part of that in addition to the CAS department, the police department, and dean of students, and then conduct is dean of students. And if you ever have questions about that, I would suggest talking to your chair as well.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you.
And Lisa, to your question in the chat about pushback for First Amendment, I'll tell you that the students in our classroom do not push back that way. It's folks who are visiting our campus or outside community spaces that usually challenge us. In fact, we did in June, we had a Pride Month celebration, and my GSA students were in tears. They ran down the hall to my office because someone from the community had posted signs on our campus that said that all LGBTQIA plus folks will go to hell, and then they quoted multiple Bible verses. So we don't usually get it from our students. Usually that interruption, that kind of call in versus call out helps. If it is something that is not easy to manage, then a SOBI or incident report usually interrupts that behavior before it gets there. So again, it's not typically our students who are saying my First Amendment rights aren't being protected, because oftentimes they kind of know what they're doing and why they're doing it.
You're absolutely correct. We have, for all of you, as the advisor of Common Ground, around June, which is Pride Month for, let me just say it's Pride Month. But then normally we will have, when it's time for the students to join any organizations on campus, there's this outside organization that comes, Freedom of Speech, and in Common Ground, we will normally have a discussion with them and stating that if they hear any negativity from this organization, just ignore them, walk past their table, because we were told, and we had the Dean of Students there as well too, along with the Director, Johnny, for Student Life. We were told it is a public institution. They have a right to come on campus to do their solicitation. But we all, and I say this with great care because it just brings tears to my eyes all the time. I just tell them, just pull yourself and walk past them. Don't say anything. And Lejos is right. It's usually from outside the campus. And like I said, it is this organization that comes outside the campus. And again, we were told they have the right to do solicitation on campus, but it does really hurt any and all our students who are part of the common ground. And it just brings tears to my eyes all the time because I tell them, just ignore them, just walk past them, don't go to the cafeteria that day. And that's the only thing that we can actually advise them to do. We haven't had any students to confront them that I know of from Common Ground with our new the new president of the organization. But that's the one thing that we tell them to do. And again, it is unfortunate that happens. It does.
Mm-hmm. Thomas, was your hand up again, or did you?
That was by accident.
Oh, okay.
Leslie said they were on campus today. Oh,
Really?
yeah. And again, like I said, we normally thank you, Leslie. I forgot about that today. And again, we normally just tell them, our students who are within Common Ground, maybe not go to the cafeteria or just ignore them. Just walk past them. Don't say anything. Just ignore them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, that's
there are several individuals. I would say about 3. I tell them, don't go to the cafeteria because they want to say something so much, but no, don't say anything.
It's so hard, right? Because they're like, I really just want to stand up. I really just, and we have to, you're right. Just don't engage, just keep it moving. And, I get questions a lot about like, well, what about religion? And what about this? And I'm like, there's so many different arguments, and I try not to get in the weeds about it because I found a really great documentary called 1946. And I say, you know what, we're not going to have this conversation, but I will recommend this. Please watch this, and then let's talk, because it talks a lot about the misinterpretation of the language when they were writing the New International Version of the Bible, which is what right-wing conservative folks have picked up, the NIV. So in the 60s, we see Falwell and kind of politics and religion marrying against the LGBTQIA plus community, but it's because of the misinterpretation of Greek words when they were rewriting the Bible. So anyway, all that to say is folks who are part of the community can also be practicers of religion and spirituality. And so I think that often folks want to have that argument first. And if you want to go into the weeds about it, I say first educate yourself. Don't just take one person's perspective or one ideology as everything. And I tell people, I'm not here to change your moral perspective. I'm not here to change your values. What I am here to do is ask you to connect to your heart space. What does this tell you about how to treat people? What does your heart tell you about respect and value? When you start to engage with your heart, it changes the way that the language is built in your head and what comes out of your mouth. So if you connect here before you connect here, the things that come out here are not as hurtful. And so I tell people, reflect on it, connect to that space first. And it really does help you build relationships differently. I have a friend who's a pastor, and for the first 2 years that I was at Alamo Colleges, we didn't really talk. And she told me after attending a training, she said, I appreciate you coaching me through this, because I could have missed out on a really good friendship because my belief was preventing me from seeing you as a friend. And we have been friends ever since. And it's that perspective that I want people to take. I'm not asking you to change your religious views. I'm not preaching to you at all. I'm just saying we've got to make sure that we see people and we respect them. It's not up to us to tell people who they are. It's not up to us to manage people's expression. We're not gender police. That's not our place. Our place is educators. We are here to build an informed society, an inclusive society, a civic-minded group of folks who are going to go out there and make change, and true change, radical change. And that radical change typically starts with us. It starts with us before we can go change the world, right? We have to change the world that we live in first in order to make a bigger impact. So remember, if you don't remember anything else, connect to your heart space, and that's going to help you connect to your students.
Thank you. Thank you. Words of wonderful wisdom. I was given the time is coming to an end for all of it. I wish we could carry this great conversation on for days. I know. I'm just kidding. I know. Maybe for hours. Maybe? Okay. Maybe we can keep talking, yeah. So at this time, for all of you, I would like to do the following as the moderator. I would like to say thank you to our presenter, Alejos, for a wonderful, engaging conversation, lots of great information, resources, and as she stated, I do have that information for all of you. I will be sending out through the CTE the presentation with her resources and links. At this time, like I would do in my class, I would like everyone to do the following with one hand on your right and the other hand on your left. Give yourself a hug. Thank you so much, and I greatly appreciate all of you being here in today's presentation.
Thank you.